I think that's all the chapter business. So we may want to move on to the program at hand, which is, as you can see, Broadcast Spectrum Management Issues and Current Threats by Chris Imlay, who is our National General Counsel, but also happens to live in the local area and has been kind enough for many years to join us once a year for telling us what's going on. I cannot find the mute all button. I know it's here somewhere, but for those of you who are not muted, please mute. And Chris, you can come off of mute. And
and the last part of what you said was muted. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks. Nice pickup there, Dan, and thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be with you all again this year, and I'm both humbled and very gratified by your willingness to have me back year after year. I should tell you that this is going to be my last presentation to Chapter 37 as in my capacity as SBE General Counsel, because I'm retiring at the end of this year. And as a matter of fact, SBE's in the process of commencing a search for my replacement. I was actually thinking about retiring before now, but John Freret announced his resignation as of the end of last year, and I didn't think it would be fair to the board of directors to have him search for two people in the sort of the staff area at the same time. So I had a little more flexibility than John Freret did, but I'm going to be hanging it up after, I think, about 42 years in the role of SBE General Counsel. I haven't had that title for quite that long, but I've been doing the same job for SBE for quite a while. I have very mixed feelings about this, but she who must be obeyed has dictated that there's got to be a retirement on the horizon here. So that's what we're going to do. So I usually like to have a sort of a dialogue thing going on with these presentations, most of which pertain to spectrum management, specifically broadcast auxiliary spectrum management, which SBE has kind of taken on over the years as its focus in regulatory and advocacy affairs. This time, though, there are quite a few things pending, and I've got quite a bit to say. So maybe we could hold the Q&A off until the end. If you can remember what you wanted to comment on, we'll leave plenty of time at the end of this for questions and hopefully some answers. So let me just rip through these. I wanted to talk first, if we could advance the slide one. I have a sort of an agenda here of topics. The first thing I wanted to talk about was SBE's advocacy policy. A year ago, we talked a little bit about the history of SBE's advocacy program and where it came from, and the fact that it really wasn't one of the core activities of the early years of SBE. But over time, we've developed a fairly sophisticated advocacy program that is overseen by SBE's Government Relations Committee, which reports to the board of directors and to the executive committee. As a practical matter, most of the members of the Government Relations Committee are members of the executive committee of SBE, probably properly so. And so the list of topics that I came up with for tonight's presentation are the topics that we just talked about with the board of directors at Monday night's virtual board meeting that we just had. And so these are the subjects that the SBE's board is looking at right now and has been following. And I'll give you some updates where you may have heard about some of these things before. Hopefully you'll learn something new about some of these things. But SBE's advocacy policy is typically not a particularly partisan one. Intentionally, SBE over time has sought to be a resource to FCC, to FCC's Office of Engineering and Technology, to the Wireless Bureau, to the extent that broadcast auxiliary spectrum has service rules that are administered by the Wireless Bureau, and of course to the Media Bureau, where we can provide some information that's useful. So over time, we've tried to tailor our submissions not so much to back a particular point of view or a position, but to provide information that might be helpful to the FCC in their decision-making process. Oftentimes, because we have a very active and lately extremely active frequency coordination program, we tend to want to allow FCC to envision how they might make more efficient use of all spectrum, including broadcast auxiliary spectrum. So we don't usually take a knee-jerk approach opposing a particular project that FCC has in mind that might involve some encroachment of a new radio service into one of our auxiliary bands. But we do point out to FCC what the problems are in the process. So we're kind of in the middle as an encyclopedic source, if you will. At least that's the goal. It's easy to get carried away and envision an opposition to every new sharing proposal at FCC, but it's not really feasible to do that any longer. All of the radio spectrum is allocated, and sometimes 3 and 4 deep in allocations, and so the way to proceed with a chance of benefiting broadcasters to the greatest extent possible isn't to try to create ourselves as an island. It's to work out an arrangement to try to get to a compatible sharing proposal. How can we do what the FCC wants to do without taking away from broadcast ENG, for example? That's the analysis that we use when we approach spectrum management issues within the SBE's national board. In terms of spectrum allocation trends, there's some very interesting sort of changes in the direction that FCC has taken. You've heard a lot about dynamic frequency selection for unlicensed Part 15 devices, and for allocated services where there's mixtures between fixed and mobile type uses that might otherwise be incompatible. FCC views dynamic frequency selection as a sort of a cure-all. It's not. And there are a lot of wild cards involved when you rely on that as a means of allowing spectrum overlays, which FCC is having to do and wants to do. But there's some other spectrum management tools that have come up lately. Of course, SBE is very happy about the arrangements that we've made with the Department of Defense and with NAB with respect to the 2 gigahertz band in accommodating what was a fait accompli, and that's the reaccommodation after the AWS-3 auction of spectrum in the 1.7 to 1.8 gigahertz band, to bring those displaced DoD uses after the auction into the 2 gigahertz band. We're very happy about what FCC and NTIA decided to do. They said, look, we're going to handle this all in the private sector, and DoD, you work with SBE and NAB and figure out a way to accommodate everybody without putting unreasonable burdens on broadcast auxiliary service, cars, and LTTS in the 2 gigahertz band. That's a paradigm that NAB and SBE want to encourage to be used in the future, because inevitably we're going to be sharing in the future with federal operations, and the arrangements that we have at 2 gigahertz has worked so very well that we'd like to see that duplicated in other circumstances. We're very happy to share with DoD because they have a good handle on how to do that compatibly. And they've been shown to be extremely savvy, and at the same time willing to make accommodations that are necessary to protect everybody involved. They have a good, healthy approach to this, and we'd like to encourage that in the future. But the idea of band managers is a developing concept in spectrum management tools. If you look at the CBRS, the Citizens Broadband Service that is operating now between 3550 and 3700 megahertz, the FCC uses effectively a real-time automated spectrum manager. They call them SASs. It's an automated spectrum management system, and they have a series of SASs. I've had a lot of experience with that recently because the NFL has, for its coach-to-coach communications, developed a very effective CBRS-based system. So FCC is essentially not trying to be the arbiter of spectrum management anymore. They're passing that off, and it's showing signs of working reasonably well in terms of protecting incumbents, including federal incumbents in the CBRS case, and fixed satellite service incumbents in that service without derogating from newcomers and new applications such as that the NFL has come up with. So dynamic frequency selection, either as handled by a band manager or as done by individual users and licensees in the same bands, is currently viewed by FCC as the best way to encourage spectrum efficiency and maximize spectrum overlays. So in the 2 gigahertz band, the newest proposal is to allow commercial space launch communications for non-government entities in the 2 gigahertz band, among other things. Right now, FCC's view is that there is an increasing, proliferating number of commercial space launch entities, SpaceX and those. And these companies offer space activities such as transportation of cargo and people, orbital launches for satellites and other payloads, and suborbital launches. And right now, if a commercial space venture wants to to do launch communications, they have to do it by STA. And FCC has said they think that's not an efficient way to proceed. So they issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. It's docket 13-115 back in April, on April 22nd. And the NPRM proposes to make, it's a report and order and notice of proposed rulemaking. The report and order part deals with space launch communications in the 2200 to 2290 megahertz band. That's a federal band exclusively, and it's carefully protected, although a lot of video production companies use that on a short-term STA basis for large scale event video production, but it's a government band. That's one of the bands that's discussed in this notice of proposed rulemaking. There are actually 5 frequency bands that are regularly used by STA for communications with and tracking of space launch vehicles. There's 420 to 430 megahertz, which is an amateur band and also a federal allocation south of Line A in the United States. Our 2 gigahertz band, the 2200 to 2290 megahertz band that I just mentioned, the AF-TRAC band at 2360 to 2395 megahertz, and the junk band at 5650 to 5925 megahertz. All of those bands are used for commercial space launch vehicles on a case-by-case basis where it's allowed by STA. And the 2 gigahertz band, by the way, is used during some of the space launches to send control signals to guide the rocket boosters to a control landing so they can reuse the boosters. And that seems to be the main use of the 2 gigahertz band. So there are not a whole lot of these commercial space launch operations that would use our 2 gigahertz band under this FCC proposal. But FCC says, well, we think this is going to proliferate a lot in the future. So we want to make an allocation for this. And so the NPRM says, look, we understand that broadcast auxiliary, electronic news gathering, cars operation, LTTS video production, and we also, we understand that's the heaviest use of the 2 gigahertz band now. We also understand that we've saddled the broadcasters with reaccommodating DoD displaced operations from the AWS-3 band. And we also know that Earth exploration satellite service communications are done in that same band, that NASA does some things in there, and you've got a lot to deal with. But nevertheless, we think that these commercial space launch vehicles can be accommodated. Space launch communications can be accommodated in the 2 gigahertz BAS band as well. And so they move from this acknowledgement of a hodgepodge of existing incumbents, and they acknowledge the importance of ENG. And then they say, notwithstanding all that stuff, we propose a co-primary non-federal space operation in the Earth to space and space to space directions. We propose that allocation for 2025 to 2110 megahertz. And what makes this even worse from our perspective is that they're not proposing any geographic limits on where the launch space launch communications can be conducted from. They acknowledge that right now there's a New Mexico Spaceport Authority, Virginia Commercial Space Flight Authority, and Houston Airport System. All of these non-federal spaceports are popping up here and there. And yet they're not going to limit where these facilities can be located. Neither are they going to regulate where within the 2025 to 2110 megahertz band the communications can take place. So essentially, the whole band is in play anywhere in the United States. Now, they ask a bunch of questions. And the questions are, given the heavy use of the band by broadcast auxiliary, the service rules will probably need to be conditioned on coordination with incumbent operations. Okay, that's fine. They don't propose a mechanism for doing that, and that's fine as well. Essentially, they're duplicating what they said when they put the DoD operations in 2 gigahertz, which is there's got to be coordination. There's got to be a memorandum of understanding in the DoD context between the broadcasters and DoD, and there's got to be some advanced coordination of where these things go. That's fine, but they're leaving it kind of loosey-goosey. So the biggest problem is they're asking whether or not coordination is required between non-federal and federal users. They want to know whether or not there should be limitations to only certain portions of the 2 gigahertz band, or whether there should be geographic limitations. So SBE's board on Monday night considered this, and although this is viewed as just a sort of a non-recognition of the fact that we've already got a pretty tough row to hoe with increasing 2 gigahertz operation already tiers deep in some of the larger markets. We've got a difficulty in reaccommodating some DoD displaced facilities. And that process is going much, much slower than we ever anticipated that it would. It's been ongoing since 2014. So we're going to prepare some comments and just put some factual information together and point up that there's really no good compatible way to do this without an active coordination program. And we're probably going to make the suggestion that the DoD reaccommodation plan that FCC has adopted is working out reasonably well. We would need to add, in order to make this work, the commercial space launch facilities into the same coordination requirement, and share information that would go into an MOU about standard operating parameters, and see if we can't make this work on a coordinated basis. I think NAB is inclined to take a similar position. There may be some knee-jerk oppositions filed from some sources to this, but we're going to try to take a sort of a factual approach in the comments that we're going to file. The comment date is not determined yet. It's 30 days from publication in the Federal Register, and that publication hadn't occurred as of yesterday. I didn't check it yet today, but we at least have 30 days to get that together. An interesting read, if you want to take a look at the notice of proposed rulemaking. FCC will have it in their eDocs system online. Moving to the other 2 gigahertz topic that is of concern to us. Over the last year, SBE has become concerned that FCC is granting a lot of, and this is in the International Bureau at FCC, they've been granting a lot of Earth Exploration Satellite Service, EESS, uplink applications. They're being filed at a great rate, and they're being granted without a whole lot of analysis by the International Bureau at FCC relative to the interference potential to code channel RPU or TV STLs, ICRs, TV translator relays, or TV pickups. And there is no analysis of terrain shielding, duty cycle of the uplink, or the number of EESS low Earth orbit satellites in a constellation. These applications specify the 450 RPU band, the 2 gigahertz band, and the 7 gigahertz band as well. We approached the International Bureau back in November of 2020, and we pointed out that although United States footnotes to the table of frequency allocations limit the Commission's ability to grant these to the extent that they might interfere with BAS facilities, especially at 2 gigahertz. What we've tended to see are applications that have been coordinated with ComSearch or Micronet or one of the commercial coordinators, and they make only the vaguest references to compatibility with ongoing BAS operations, especially at 2 gigahertz. Normally, a commercial coordinator will include some sort of non-specific statement with an EESS application that says that the coordinator's consultation with a database of fixed point-to-point facilities, or the receive sites that appear in the FCC database in the ULS don't show any conflicts. And that's all the analysis that's provided. And that's a one-time thing in the application for the license. There is no real-time coordination plan, despite the crowded conditions in the 2 gigahertz BAS band. Oftentimes we'll see a statement in an EESS application that's been granted or is about to be granted that'll say, the Earth station that we propose is in a remote area. End of analysis. That's the whole thing. Or sometimes they'll just say the state that it'll be located. So these are really insufficient in terms of trying to avoid interference or mitigate it in advance. The commercial coordinators can't, based on the information before them, examine an EESS uplink and determine the interference to mobile, itinerant, temporary, fixed ENG or program production receive locations that are temporary in the 2 gigahertz band. There has to be, we told the International Bureau, some dynamic frequency coordination activities by these licensees, or the proliferation of them is bound to result in interference. And it's not just interference to us, it's interference to military facilities as well. And so we asked for a review of the licensing plan for EESS satellites in the 2 gigahertz band. We didn't make reference to the 450 or the 7 gigahertz band because there are not so many of those applications, and the band of most concern to us was 2 gigahertz at the time. And we got a response to our November letter from Carl Kensinger, the acting chief of the satellite division in the International Bureau. And they said that they would contact us for a follow-up discussion. We did have finally, after a long delay, a conference call with the International Bureau staff on March 5th of this year. And we made our points reasonably well, but we didn't get any commitments from the International Bureau. And they made some comments to the effect that, well, why don't you work something out with ComSearch? And that's not really what we had in mind. We wanted something that was a little more fundamental in the licensing process, that would provide us some assurance that these licensed facilities would would be examined for compliance with United States footnotes that protect broadcast auxiliary. So we sent a second letter to the International Bureau on March 17, and we made arguments in favor of requiring prior SBE coordination before a given EESS application would be granted, similar to the way that the Office of Engineering and Technology requires that prior to commencement of operation of an experimental facility or an STA authorized facility that includes broadcast auxiliary spectrum or even primary channel broadcast operation, the experimental licensee or the STA holder has to contact the local SBE coordinator. And that program has worked out exceptionally well, and we threw that out at the International Bureau as an example of how we could do private sector coordination that really would work out. Nothing back yet from the International Bureau, and I suppose the 2 gigahertz commercial space launch allocation proposal bears on how FCC is going to handle EESS uplinks in the future. But we're not going to just let it go. If it's necessary to file something more formal, we probably will. So that's kind of the story on 2 gigahertz. In terms of our arrangements with DoD, as I mentioned before, that's working really, really well. We were just informed recently by DoD that their earlier proposal to include high altitude video downlinks from about 40,000 feet up to 40,000 feet in 2 gigahertz has been reaccommodated elsewhere. So that's no longer on the table. A great relief to us. Right now, RJ Russell, our frequency coordination manager, and his engineering firm are accommodating both tactical radio relay, ground-based communications at military facilities in 2 gigahertz, and also some test facilities for interference considerations have been established at various military bases for drones up to 2,000 feet in elevation. Those are the hand-launched small drones. So that's kind of where that stands. This is going much slower than we ever anticipated, but as I say, very collegially, very cooperatively, and very responsibly, I would suggest. So moving on, I'm talking like crazy here. Wireless mics. That's the other kind of major topic that the SBE board talked about on regulatory subjects at the board meeting on Monday night. So way back in 2015, in docket 15-146, which dealt with accommodating UHF wireless mics that were displaced from the 600 megahertz band when the auction was envisioned. One of the proposals that FCC had was to set aside a single 6 megahertz television channel in every market that would be used by wireless mics at UHF and TV white space devices. And FCC didn't do anything with that proposal, but as you know by now, they vastly limited the availability of UHF wireless mics to the 500 megahertz band effectively, and hither and yon in the duplex gap in the 600 megahertz band, and that's what was available at UHF. But FCC did make spectrum available at 950 megahertz, around 950 megahertz in the STL band, the RL STL band, and and also at 1.4 gigahertz in the AF-track band, and at 7 gigahertz, based on the fact that some wireless mics were being manufactured in Europe to operate at 7 gigahertz. Well, FCC came up in last year with a report and order terminating docket 15-146 and saying, look, we've concluded that we really can't set aside a 6 megahertz channel for wireless mics and white space devices. First of all, we think we made adequate accommodation for wireless mics in the 950, the 1.4, and the 7 gigahertz band, and residually in the 500 megahertz portion of the TV band, and in the duplex gap. Second, there aren't available after the repack. There aren't available 6 megahertz channels in every market, so we can't do this proposal as a practical matter. So we're terminating proposal. We're not going to set aside a single TV channel in each market for wireless mics and TV white spaces devices. That didn't sit too well with Sennheiser and Shure. Sennheiser and Shure filed very similar petitions for reconsideration of that FCC report and order after the report and order came out in December of 2020. And they said, look, there's very high demand for UHF wireless mics because the DTV repack moved a lot of TV stations into 500 megahertz. There's far less available spectrum for UHF wireless mics. There's been a radical increase in sports and entertainment and ENG audio production. It's dramatically increased demand for wireless mic spectrum, while the supply at the same time has dwindled. And they said that the alternative bands that FCC made available in 2017 at 950, 1.4, and 7 gigahertz, those aren't sufficient substitutes for a lot of reasons, either due to incumbents in those bands, cumbersome authorization procedures, and or significantly reduced propagation characteristics. So Sennheiser and Shure drummed up a lot of support for these very well argued petitions for reconsideration. There were about 100 kind of comments, which isn't really what you do when there's a petition for reconsideration in a rulemaking proceeding, but that's what happened. I mean, people treated it as like an ongoing notice and comment rulemaking and filed their comments, mostly from individuals, although there were a few telecom organizations that filed comments, and all of those individual comments favored the Shure and Sennheiser argument. Notably, NAB opposed these petitions for reconsideration. The NAB said, look, this was all dealt with in comments and it's been asked and answered. There's no reason to revisit this. And NAB's interest, of course, was in making sure that there was reaccommodation spectrum for full power TV stations in all the markets to the greatest extent possible. Not an unreasonable position at all, but it complicated matters a little bit in terms of SBEs deciding what our position ought to be, and what the board decided to do was to direct the Government Relations Committee to develop a submission to FCC, noting the validity of the argument by Shure and Sennheiser that there isn't sufficient reaccommodation spectrum available, and that additional UHF spectrum would be a distinct plus, especially for major events, political conventions, major entertainment events, sporting events especially. The shortages of wireless mic spectrum at the Super Bowl, at Major League Baseball events, those kinds of things. It's substantial at major entertainment events. So what we're planning to do right now is to make a factually based submission that that doesn't argue one way or another for a set-aside channel, but noting that the point is very well taken that there's insufficient UHF wireless mic spectrum now available. Shure, by the way, Shure and Sennheiser have a tough row to hoe because FCC has carefully considered this and decided not to do a set-aside, and they have very practical reasons for not doing so. And so it would be a bit surprising if there was a successful outcome of this from the perspective of Shure and Sennheiser. But I've been wrong before. I didn't buy cellular telephone stock when I should have. 6.5 and 7 gigahertz. That's another interesting subject right now. That's in the United States Court of Appeals. When the FCC decided to allow unlicensed RLANs in the band 5925 to 7125, including both our 6.5 and 7 gigahertz band, that decision was popular with almost nobody. There were numerous appeals filed in various different United States courts of appeal, and they were consolidated in the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, which is now considering the arguments. What FCC did was it made 1,200 megahertz of spectrum available for unlicensed use in the band I just mentioned. And FCC said, oh, we've got carefully crafted rules to protect incumbents in this band, including broadcasters. They divided this band, this 1,200 megahertz, up into two different types of unlicensed operations: standard power for outdoor operation and low power operation for indoor RLANs. For the outdoor standard power facilities, which are 36 dBi, they required automatic frequency control, listen before transmit sensing. They didn't require this for indoor operation, which is limited to 30 dBi EIRP. And they said that, well, that would not work out very well for indoor applications. As I say, this was popular with nobody. AT&T, Edison Electric Institute, APCO, the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials, NAB, the Utilities Telecom Council, the Rural Electric Cooperative Association, the American Public Power Association, CenturyLink, a whole lot of appellants said, look, FCC, you haven't taken into consideration the interference potential of these facilities for broadcasters, public safety entities, wireless communications providers, utilities. All of them use this spectrum to provide services to the public. And your assurances that that you've got rules that are going to prevent interference are very, very hollow indeed. You've got very high power levels. You have a completely unenforceable indoor-outdoor environmental limitation that can't be enforced and that you'd have no ability to enforce. NAB's contribution to a joint brief that was filed in the case, very well argued, by the way. NAB's contribution was a notation that, you know, television broadcasters have fixed and mobile operations at 6.5 and at 7 gigahertz, and they require completely different measures to be adequately insulated from interference than what you've provided for fixed operations. In other words, FCC, you really failed. So I don't know where this is going. The FCC wins, at last count, about 75% of the court appeals in rulemaking matters that are taken to United States Courts of Appeal. That said, the District of Columbia Circuit, United States Court of Appeals, gets most of the FCC court appeals, and the judges are particularly savvy about telecommunications regulation. The number of appellants here and the arguments that they've made are pretty impressive. So this may or may not follow the usual pattern in which FCC wins and we're off to the races. But there is a significant source of interference on the horizon to the 6.5 and 7 gigahertz bands from literally billions of these unlicensed devices, and FCC hasn't adequately accommodated or taken into account the aggregate interference potential. Land mobile interference from DTV. During the during the period of time that the pandemic has been going on, and during the time that the TV repack has been going on from 600 megahertz downward, the Land Mobile Communications Council has become increasingly active in expressing its concern to FCC about DTV interference to land mobile radio in the T-band, channels 14 through 20. There have for years been rules that have been in place to deal with DTV interference to TV channel 14. A specific rule is 73.623E, which has minimum distance separations between full power DTV and PLMR T-band markets. And a DTV transmitter has to be 250 kilometers from the city center of a co-channel land mobile operation in the T-band, and 176 kilometers from an adjacent channel T-band market. And LMCC, which is composed of both land mobile frequency coordination entities, industry associations like EWA, and various different land mobile communications companies. They have argued to FCC that the distance separations are inadequate to provide the interference protection that's necessary, and that there are rampant cases of DTV interference, not only on channel 14, but in that entire range in the Dallas and Houston and Los Angeles and San Francisco markets, New York, et cetera. And they argue that land mobile radio systems are desensed and rendered inoperable by DTV stations, both co-channel and adjacent channel. And they don't deny that that the DTV stations are operating in accordance with FCC's rules, but so are the land mobile stations. And the situation has gotten much worse with the repack, after the repack and during the repack. And so LMCC wrote a letter to FCC and was originally casting TV broadcasters in as the bad guys, and SBE didn't like that. So we went to LMCC and said, look, we can provide a little information here that might help you. Why don't you put us on your DTV interference committee and work with us rather than against us? And we'll see if we can use some of this tremendous amount of auction revenues for 600 megahertz relocate code channel DTV stations that are causing interference where there's no other solution. But the broadcasters are really not the problem here. You know, the repack was ordered by FCC, and we did what we had to do. Don't let's you know, point the finger at each other and shout bad guy. Let's just work it out. And they went for that. They were very happy to do that. And so LMCC wrote another extensive letter about this interference problem to FCC early this year. And they took a much more hat-in-hand approach to the issue from the broadcaster's perspective. But it is a very real interference problem, interference that can prevent a land mobile system from being keyed up has been detected all the way down to 461 megahertz, you know, quite a ways down from TV channel 14. So did somebody have a question? Okay. So this is an ongoing thing. It's been a little quiet for the last 4 months or so, and FCC hasn't taken any action in response to the concerns that were expressed by LMCC. But SBE continues to work with the LMCC and in a cooperative way, and we want to make sure that the DTV stations aren't cast as the source of the problem here, and we want to see that any remediation that needs to be done, especially for co-channel interference cases. Adjacent channel interference is easily addressed apparently by adding filters, and a lot of the adjacent channel cases have been resolved satisfactorily to all concerned that way. Finally, I just had a couple of things, and I'll cut it short with respect to the C-band auction and C-band rebanding. I don't have any great insights into the progress of the C-band rebanding to spectrum up in the 4,000 to 4,200 megahertz band. And I don't know what the timetable is for the lump sum payments that have been applied for by a majority of the stations that elected that remedy rather than leaving it to the entity that's handling the rebanding. But I did want to notice, I did want to note something that that's a bit problematic. The 5G auction was, in terms of money, the most successful auction that the FCC has ever had. It produced about $80 billion, $80.9 billion. And the prior record for an auction was the AWS-3 auction 5 years ago that auctioned off a segment of 1.7 to 1.8 gigahertz. And so when that kind of money is realized at an auction, it sends both Congress and the FCC and the executive branch into a frenzy. And so there's plenty of money to pay for C-band rebanding, but what we suffered in the process here is likely to be repeated numerous times over. So far, the only new bands that FCC is looking at are going down from 3.55 gigahertz down, and that's all government spectrum, all the way down to about 2.8 gigahertz. And NTIA it has already rolled over on giving up 3450 to 3550 megahertz, and that's scheduled for auction in the near term. So what the auction of spectrum in the 2.8 to 5 gigahertz range, to the extent that it hadn't already happened, is the segment where most of the attention is being given. There's not a broadcast interest in that fight anymore now that C-band reallocation is a foregone conclusion. But I know that a lot of video production companies have used the 3,300 to 3,500 gigahertz, 3,300, 3,500 megahertz band for short-term video production events, and NTIA has been pretty good about allowing that to happen so far. But that segment's going to all be auctioned, and as the further you go down, from what DoD tells me, the more compelling that the federal applications are. So down below about 3,400 megahertz, there are more intense and important national security uses, including but not limited to government radars in that segment. And that's about all I had on the subject. So that's about all I have. I've talked for forever. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If I talk too long, I apologize.
All right, I think everybody but Chris and myself are on mute. But if you have a question, go ahead and unmute, and let's see what kind of discussions we have. I think that's safer than unmuting everyone blindly.
An observation about T-band interference into land mobile.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're aware that the repack has also resulted in DTV interference into DTV stations. And, you know, we're suffering badly because of the fact that they've sucked all the air out of the band. And now Washington, D.C. is co-channeled to a lot of Philadelphia stations. And, you know, we're getting our butts chewed good. So they're not the only ones.
That's a really good point. And now that you mention it, Dan, I'll raise the subject with the LMCC. It's about time I checked in with them anyway, because I don't want them dreaming up any plans that we're not a part of. Now, I shouldn't say that. They're really good folks, and you know, they have a legitimate problem. But I think the most beneficial thing that we've done with respect to that was to approach LMCC and say, look, you know, to the extent you want to make us the bad guys, that isn't going to fly. You've really got to point out that we're all in this same boat, and let's see if we can get our hands on some of the auction revenues from this auction, and start solving the problems using OPM, other people's money.
That's the best kind. But just for some insight, I live in Prince William County, and I'm about 63 miles away from the TV stations in Baltimore. With my directional antenna aimed up to the northeast, it goes right up the Interstate 95 corridor. And I very frequently will see WPHL channel 17 here in Prince William County. And channel 17 is where all of the DC police, fire, rescue folks line up on T-band channels. So if I'm watching a TV channel from Philadelphia, I don't know how far I am from a haul. It's got to be clobbering the public safety channels in the district.
Yeah, given the frequency range, that's a phenomenon that's not going to be particularly avoidable in terms of the land mobile interference.
Yeah, I think, Chris, the other thing that was, you know, curious to me, and maybe it's just I've been in the business too long or something, but we're coming for your C-band to get out happened really fast. And, my guess is that because of the amount of money that's involved, any of these future ones are going to also happen really fast. And I don't know if the equipment manufacturers are agile enough to keep jumping one step ahead of the latest auction. But, the expense that the broadcasters go to change antennas and change the hard parts of this. I mean, if it was just, here's a pile of money, buy this new piece of hardware that's installed in your rack room and everything will be fine, is a far cry from, well, you need a helicopter and, a tower crew you can't get and weather you can't guarantee to clear this, space. And my hope is that, the television broadcast has been, beaten over the head twice in the last few cycles of receiver equipment lifetime, that they just can't go do it again, because like this time, the receivers are going to have to be replaced slowly because there's no government money to put converters in. But I mean, is there anybody else out there that is going to be the next victim, or do we just have to wait for the next one to come after the what remaining channels are left?
Broadcasters have really taken it on the chin relative to other services. When I was representing the American Radio Relay League, we kept a pretty careful eye on what amateur bands were targeted for, or likely to be targeted for reallocation and auction. And every time we turn around, it wouldn't be an amateur band that would be involved. It'd be a broadcast band or a broadcast auxiliary band that was at issue. I mean, we took it on the chin on the 600 megahertz auction. We took it on the chin on C-band. And the only reason, I swear, I'll go to my grave believing this, the only reason we didn't lose the C-band entirely was because above 4.2 gigahertz at the top end of the band, the only reason that 200 megahertz C-band was left to us residually was because they couldn't run 5G all the way up to 4.2 gigahertz, because that would cause interference to aeronautical mobile communications. And FCC heard it, and they said, okay, well, we'll put a buffer in there. And they knew that, that the C-band facilities that broadcasters had weren't going to interfere with that. So I believe that's the only reason we have any C-band spectrum to relocate to. But what I've never understood, and you all know this much better than me, and nobody's ever explained it to me in a way that I've been able to understand it. And that is, what is really the effect of reducing the C-band from 3.7 gigahertz to 4.2 gigahertz all the way down to 4 to 4.2 gigahertz? What is it? Is it just that you can't have full arc coverage of the of the C-band, or what? I mean, how hurt are we by this?
It's capacity. For any given orbital position, your bandwidth is reduced substantially, so there aren't as many active transponders. So it ends up being a compression sort of thing where, CBS and Viacom uses C-band extensively for distribution around the country, around the world, really. And so there's just a bunch of jockeying now to make sure that all the services that we continue to provide can still fit into that remaining 200 megahertz chunk of spectrum. Right. So there have been some significant advancements in encoding technology that have made what's left a little bit more efficient, but still it's tough. And then, you have this whole shell game of having to rejigger the services so that they can find new homes at these higher frequencies. So the transition is going to be a bit of a challenge as well.
Yeah.
Chris, was there any, with the C-band thing, I mean, we're talking about, there's money for broadcasters through either a vendor or themselves, replace antennas, put filters in, all the things that you can do, because, to work on that stuff, you need a ladder. But for the people who built and own and operate those satellites, they've lost the capacity for a bunch of their customers.
Yeah.
And they're never getting them back. Were the Intelsats and Panamsat's not around anymore, but were those people made whole for this, essentially taking of a lot of stuff that they've already got in orbit and can't do anything about?
On a business loss basis, no, not at all. They absolutely have not been. And in that respect, frankly, and this was purely out of self-interest, because FCC didn't want any foot dragging in getting the broadcast users out of the C-band. They made sure that the reimbursement amounts were to come from upfront payments by the 5G bidders. So they didn't wait until the end of the auction to get the money together to be assured of adequate amounts of funds for retrofitting C-band receive dishes. They went ahead and decided to take it out of the upfront payments, so that the money was going to be on the table. And the other thing that they did that I think was fairly reasonable from our perspective was that they said, look, you don't have to do anything until the compensation's on the table. So whether or not you elect the upfront fixed payment or you decide to go with an actual reimbursement amount, in which case this will be done for you, you don't have to do anything at all until the money's on the table. And that made it much more palatable. And so nobody's gonna resist. And they also made the fixed payments that could be the fixed payment election high enough that it was reasonably attractive to most broadcast entities. So I do think they try to make it into a seamless process, but and I appreciate, Dan, your explanation of this, because I didn't realize that part of the price that was being paid here was compression. But if they were going to do this, no matter what. And it could have easily gone the other way. It could have easily been a situation where broadcasters were just urged to get their feeds from other sources beyond C-band, because the money was talking well before the auction revenues were ascertained. They knew it was going to be high. Because the need for 5G and rapid deployment was a sort of a head down, get it done at all costs kind of thing, and they knew there was a lot of money on the table.
All righty. Does anyone else have any questions for Chris? This is our last opportunity. Although, Chris, we hope you'll still join us in meetings, and not in your capacity as general counsel, but you still live in the area, and one day we'll be back to having in-person meetings, I guess. So,
well, I very much look forward to coming back and heckling my successor here. Then when she or he comes to speak with you all, and I don't doubt for a second that part of the obligation of whoever my successor turns out to be, that that person's going to both want to and feel obligated to make this chapter her or his home chapter. So I will look forward to joining you all a little more often. And I can't just walk away. There's only so much time I can do playing bagpipes and doing ham radio.
Yeah. For instance, Norm here, when you retire, are you going to stay put, or are you going to move to the beach like others have done?
If it were a beach that I was going to move to, Norm, it'd be Hatteras, North Carolina. That's kind of my other home, even though I've never owned one down there. But no, we're going to stick around here. I have a place in Western Maryland that's somewhat antenna impaired, and I've always looked forward to putting a big, long beverage antenna along the ridge line that I have, which slopes down to the Antietam Creek, and it's custom made for 160 meters. So,
that's okay. Elevation here is 0 or slightly below sea level, so you're ahead of the game.
Well, I do envy you if you live in Lewis now. That's a very nice area, and we have a lot of friends there. I'll look you up.
Wonderful. Thanks for letting me join.
And you just answered my question. I was going to ask what you were going to do in your retirement.
Yeah, no, I haven't had enough time for ham radio. My antennas are a mess. And as a matter of fact, if any of you know somebody who is nice and young and willing to do tower climbing for compensation, I'm reluctant to go up those things anymore. So,
believe it or not, there are companies that do exactly that. I know, it's shocking.
I'm going to have to retain one because I got a lot of antenna work to do, and the Macmillan Pipe Band has my heart and soul.
Well, I'm sure that we can hook you up with a tower company.
Thanks. Good to see you all. And thanks very much for these opportunities. I've enjoyed them more than you know.
Chris, before you sign off, thank you for joining us so many years and bringing us and keeping us up to speed on this. And your contribution to the industry is just so greatly appreciated. Thank you.
My pleasure. Good evening, folks.